For a company that very few people in Britain knew of 5 years ago, let alone knew how to pronounce, Huawei has become a staple of newspaper headlines in recent years. Huawei have become famous, or infamous depending on who you ask, for their involvement in 5G networks in the UK and around the world, with 5G being a controversial topic on its own. So in this video, we're going to discuss the latest news that suggests that Britain may be cutting all ties with the Chinese tech giant and ending their involvement in the UK's 5G infrastructure, following in the US's footsteps. But is this really necessary? Can Huawei, and 5G for that matter, really be trusted? If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. And if you are new around here, there's a whole bunch of other videos you might like on the topics of technology, privacy, and China. Thanks for your support, and thanks for subscribing to the channel. So to catch everyone up, let's start by explaining who Huawei are and what 5G is. Let's start with 5G. 5G, or 5th generation technology, is the new standard for mobile communications, following in the footsteps of 0G, 1G, 2G, 3G, and 4G, as well as a bunch of other Gs in between. In the simplest terms, the new standard provides a greater bandwidth than its predecessors, which allows for greater download speeds. You might be thinking, my phone's plenty fast enough already, I don't need this upgrade. And if that's you, then I'm glad you're happy with your phone plan. But 5G has much wider implications than just that. With increased speeds, it could replace home Wi-Fi for many, especially those in remote areas. It could facilitate more complex and reliable automation, and could be used to power all kinds of IoT devices. So while one of the benefits of 5G might be its speed, it also allows all kinds of other tech to operate by providing stronger and more reliable connections. Also, and I refuse to get into this again in this video, despite claims from conspiracy theorists, there's no evidence to support or even suggest that this technology is dangerous to humans, just as claims about 2G, 3G, 4G and Wi-Fi were all proven to be unfounded after the technology was rolled out. When it comes to 5G, there are 9 major players in the 5G market, who provide hardware and systems to countries and companies around the world, with the biggest being Qualcomm, Ericsson, Nokia, ZTE, Samsung, and of course Huawei. And if we're talking about the number of all-important 5G patents held by these companies, Huawei is actually the biggest, and regardless of how you're measuring it, they're certainly one of the biggest and most influential suppliers of 5G tech. This is very worrying to some people, and that's largely because of where the company's based. On this list, we have a variety of nations represented. One from America, 2 EU companies, 1 from South Korea, and importantly, 2 from China. And unless you've been living under a rock, you might have worked out why this is an issue for many. Across the world, but predominantly led by Trump's United States, relationships with China have been deteriorating, and trust in the superpower seems to be dropping rapidly. As such, some countries are cautious to allow Chinese tech giant Huawei to have a hand in their mobile communications infrastructure. The fear of Chinese businesses isn't completely unfounded either. There are elements of Chinese law which certainly do raise genuine concerns. For example, the Chinese government has the right to demand data from companies, which they must then hand over to the government. With the volume of data passing through a 5G network, it's easy to see how this raises some eyebrows. In addition to this, there are some that are simply concerned that the Chinese government will be given backdoor access to the infrastructure, allowing them a closer look into Britain than many would be happy with. On top of that, people are concerned that by handing over control of the 5G network to an external and potentially hostile nation, could give China an oversized influence over the UK, and potentially shut off and deeply impact the UK's telecommunications network, especially when you consider the future of driverless cars and connected medical devices. Now, Huawei does attempt to assuage these concerns, insisting that the company doesn't have any links with the Chinese state. As a result, the company filed a lawsuit against the United States and accused the country of repeatedly failing to produce any evidence to support its restrictions and misleading the public about Huawei. In fact, in Huawei's defense, there's actually evidence of the company working together with the UK to try and increase transparency and develop new technologies. The UK intelligence services have worked closely with them at the Huawei Cybersecurity Evaluation Centre in Oxfordshire, allowing the UK government to look closely at the code that Huawei is developing and implementing in the UK. In the whole time that this program has been going on, no backdoors have ever been found, and any issues that have been identified have been chalked up as unintentional mistakes, and Huawei has quickly fixed them. Now, I know a ton of people are already commenting that we're having the wool pulled over our eyes, and that this whole thing is just a PR stunt, and maybe it is. But it's worth noting the good relationship that UK and Huawei have had up until now, despite pressures from the US. So as the UK began to roll out 5G connectivity a couple of years ago, they clearly had a big decision to make. Should they involve arguably the world's biggest 5G company in their plans, or not? The conversations around this topic continued for months, and at the beginning of this year, the UK seemed to have reached a conclusion about the issue. Britain decided to allow Huawei to be part of the network, but limit the reach of the controversial company. They attempted to find this balance by mandating that Huawei couldn't own a stake in the UK's 5G network that was any larger than 35%, as well as excluding them from the 5G core, the most sensitive part of the UK's network. This balanced approach is quite different from many other major nations, most notably the US, who banned the company from having any involvement in the country's mobile networks. Australia and New Zealand took a similar approach, and in Canada, the two largest telcos both decided to work with other suppliers, effectively blocking Huawei from Canada too. And we didn't pick these countries at random either. These four nations, plus the UK, make up the Five Eyes Alliance. Despite sounding like a shady James Bond-esque alliance, the Five Eyes is a long-standing intelligence sharing alliance, as well as being something that makes Britain's laxer approach to Huawei stand out a little more. Much of this hostility seems to have originated in America, and more specifically with President Trump. Despite there being genuine concerns worth discussing, it seems that a lot of Trump's reluctance to work with Huawei stems from his personal animus towards China more generally, and the ongoing trade war going on between the countries. And beyond that, it seems that Trump may also hope that a side effect of this move could be damaging the Chinese giant and advancing US companies. In fact, it seems that Huawei believe this too, with the company previously stating that at least some of the international hostility they've received is as a result of them being a competitive threat to other businesses around the world, something which in a globalized free market world shouldn't be an issue. In fact, the Chinese government have said something similar, accusing the moves taken against the company of being rooted in protectionism and discriminatory practices. So, as we'll touch on in a moment, the decision related to Huawei could fundamentally impact UK-Chinese relations. So, given the position of the UK's allies, rising tensions between UK and China following escalations in Hong Kong, it wasn't all that surprising when this conversation resurfaced. On Saturday, The Telegraph reported that Johnson's government would begin phasing out existing Huawei technology and prevent any new tech from being installed, with the change allegedly happening as soon as the end of the year. According to the Telegraph report, this was due to changes in GCHQ's guidance, the UK's intelligence and security organisation. However, given how drastic these changes seem to be, some accuse the government of simply copying US policy. Or, as Huawei UK's head of international media put it on Twitter, UK policy is being directed by the Trump administration, European Parliament replaced by the White House? While I'm sure the government would vehemently deny that they're being controlled by the White House, it does seem that the US is fairly central to this decision-making. That's because, since the UK government made the decision to just limit Huawei's access in January, the US announced serious new sanctions on China in May. These sanctions prevent China, and by extension Huawei, from purchasing American semiconductors, meaning that the company now has to source these from a new supplier. With new, likely Chinese suppliers replacing American parts, the UK is concerned about this added risk. Former MI6 head John Soares said UK intelligence services can therefore no longer provide the needed assurances that Chinese-made equipment is still safe to use in the UK's telecoms network. According to the report in the Sunday Times, UK telecoms companies BT and Vodafone would both be given up until 2030 to remove Huawei equipment from their networks. This might seem like a very long time if the UK believes that the concerns about Huawei are genuine. In fact, MP Bob Seeley commented something similar, saying that 2029 is going to be a long time for some colleagues who want to see Huawei out of the system by the end of this parliament. The problem is that in reality, it's just not that easy. If you're worried that your Echo is listening to you because you suddenly got an ad for the drink you just mentioned, then the answer's simple. You can just unplug it. But if you're worried that one of the biggest tech companies and governments in the world is spying on you after 20 years of working together, it's a fair bit harder to handle. Huawei's technology already runs deep in the UK's 3G, 4G, 5G and broadband infrastructure, and removing it all very quickly without plans or replacements could significantly damage the network. Not only that, doing so would make the government's promise to roll out nationwide full fibre internet by 2025 much more difficult. In fact, talking on this point to the BBC, the Prime Minister commented, "We have to come up with the right technological solutions, but we will also make sure that we continue to deliver the broadband that the UK needs," with a spokesman confirming that there's been no change to the broadband 2025 target. So it seems that the UK may be on the brink of banning Huawei from their mobile networks, but such a move would not be well received in Beijing. China's ambassador to the UK warned about exactly this, saying that removing Huawei could be seen as a hostile move, which would make China-UK relations more difficult, saying, "We want to be your friend, we want to be your partner, but if you want to make China a hostile country, you will have to bear the consequences." On top of that, he echoed the sentiment shared by Huawei, saying that following the US could damage the UK's reputation as a country independent from Washington. What do you think though? Should the UK be following the Five Eyes alliance and removing Huawei from Britain's networks? Or is the UK falling for Trump's scaremongering about China and bowing down to the power of Washington? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, you can get involved over on Discord. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a video. Also, if you want to check out any of those other videos I mentioned at the beginning, all of them are linked in the description below. Special thanks to our Patreon backers whose support makes videos like this one possible.